All right, thank you. Welcome to our folks both in person here and online. It looks like we've got about 8 or 9 people online. And we may have more people trickle in. The roads are pretty bad up right now, so we'll see. Anyway, I am going to talk for about the next hour. We can make this as interactive as you want, and that goes for everybody online too. I know that you'll be putting your questions in the chat, but I think Sam and Mike will interrupt me. So let's feel free to make it more conversational because I think that's how we learn, right? So this is an introduction to beekeeping, so I don't know how much experience folks have with bees, what your level of experience is, or your, yeah, 0 is good, okay. If you guys want to put in the chat, if you are, I guess questions I have are you getting bees this year? Have you had bees, or do you currently have bees or had bees in the past? Or are you just interested in learning more about what it takes to do beekeeping and what it takes to support pollinators? So I'm going to go to our room here and ask you guys what you're interested in.
Maybe sometime down the road it would be cool, but not this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we've got someone who is thinking maybe in the future having bees, but interested in what it is.
I know nothing about beekeeping whatsoever.
Okay, but you're interested.
Curious.
All right. Well, thanks for coming. And are you getting anything in the chat?
Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay. Well, folks, can they hear me?
They can. Yeah,
They can.
actually, we have one. Kate says introductory level. I want to get bees this year.
Yep.
I've not had them in the past. I want to know everything.
Okay. Well, I don't think I can teach you everything in an hour, but I'm going to give you a lot of information. And I am hopefully going to be announcing some upcoming beekeeping classes too. So for folks who might want to do more, we can talk about that. So this is introduction to beekeeping, but I'm going to approach this as kind of going through the whole year of what happens in a beehive, particularly when you first get a brand new beehive. Okay, it looks like you've got more stuff in the chat. Anything?
Yeah, somebody else is interested in learning about growing native plants for bees.
Perfect.
And somebody else has also had bees for 3 years, never overwinter in New Hampshire, and they'll be going again this year.
Okay, cool. All right, perfect. Well, we can talk about that, and they can certainly ask questions as we go along. So I'm going to approach this, we're going to go through the whole year. I am going to talk about forage and for nectar and pollen. I'm doing this from the perspective of my experience here, so this is definitely tailored to northern New England and not somewhere else, because we have a lot of special climate and everything here. So, okay. As Sam said, I'm a 3rd generation beekeeper. I actually grew up in South Dakota. My grandpa had bees for many, many years there, and my parents had bees when I was a kid. So from what I remember from beekeeping as a kid are doing hive inspections, looking for the queen, checking on the bees, and doing honey harvest. It's a lot different now. That was in the early 80s, and it is very, very different. It's much more challenging, I would say. There are a lot of factors that are affecting the ability to successfully beekeep, it's more scientific. I am a Cornell Master Beekeeper. That means I've been through all of Cornell's classes. I have a certification from them. My husband and I own Black Dog Bees and Maple Trees in Lebanon, which is a 30-acre woods farm. So we have a sugar bush, we have an apiary, we have Icelandic chickens. We do grow some log-grown shiitake mushrooms that we sell at the farmer's market. So maybe you've seen me at the farmer's market. We also have 2 big livestock guardian dogs that help protect our bees, our sap lines, and our chickens from predators like foxes, coyotes, bobcats, and bears. I can talk about any of that stuff too. If people have questions, happy to answer them. I told you that I grew up in South Dakota. I actually originally came to Hanover in 1997 for grad school at the college. So I also am a scientist by training. I have a PhD from the Earth Science Department. I left in 2002 and went out and lived in Wyoming for 6 years. I left in 2003, sorry. Went out and lived in Wyoming for 6 years, and I came back in 2009, and I've been here ever since, living in Lebanon. And I can't imagine living anywhere else at this point. I love the Upper Valley. I definitely belong here. It's my community. And so happy to be teaching folks here about beekeeping. Okay. Let's see. All right, so a little bit about honeybees. I do have some props and things which we'll talk about here in the room, and we'll try to make sure you can see them on the camera when I'm talking about them. And I have some poster boards that have additional photos that we can use when we're talking about certain conditions in the hive or honeybee behavior or attributes. So the honeybee, its scientific name is Apis mellifera. It is actually not native to North America. So that is something that usually surprises people quite a bit. Honeybees were brought here by our European ancestors when they came over. There are a lot of native bees, a lot of native pollinators, and honeybees and our native bees tend to live very well together in their foraging communities and everything. But honeybees, I have come to view honeybees more as livestock than because they're not a native bee species. They're also not wild. Any honeybees that we have living, like if you find bees living in a barn wall or in a tree, they're feral, meaning that they've escaped from somebody's hive, they've established there. They may have been there for years, but they're feral bees. So that's usually the first interesting thing. So I tend to manage them, and the Department of Agriculture also views them as livestock, and sometimes that helps in your thinking in terms of how you work to keep them going through the year. Honeybees are generally very gentle. So are a lot of our other pollinators like bumblebees, sweat bees, mason bees. They're very gentle. The types of bees that are not gentle are your hornets and wasps, which nobody likes. So it's okay. You don't have to like all bees. I don't really like those bees either. I don't like them around me, but they can go live in peace somewhere else. But honeybees are generally gentle. There are times of the year when you're getting into the hive where they're not. If you are a beekeeper, unless you are never getting in your hive, which probably won't have great success in beekeeping if you don't do that, you will likely get stung. So we can talk about, if people have questions about protective gear and what I do, I'm happy to talk about that. I didn't put much in the content for that. Honeybees can recognize human faces. So if I go into a hive and I collect honey and I'm in a hurry or something and they don't really like what I'm doing, their guard bees definitely recognize me. And I had a bee one time, I stepped out the back door of our house and I had a bee come straight for my forehead from the apiary. So she was waiting. She was not happy with me. They do forage up to between 2 and 3 miles from their hives for nectar and pollen, which is pretty cool. So that means that, we live just south of Lebanon. We're still up on the edge of town in Lebanon. So they probably don't come all the way to Hanover to forage, but they definitely forage all over Lebanon. Our bees do. So if you have flowers growing in your garden there, or apple trees or anything like that, even maple trees, which we'll talk about, our bees are probably visiting your property. Or if you know of other bees within a couple miles of your property, then they're probably visiting there. They actually, a honeybee, a worker bee, will make only 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in its lifetime. So that's why there are tens of thousands of bees in a hive. When we're pulling 40, 50 pounds of honey, maybe 80 pounds of honey out of a hive in the spring, think about how much that is compared to what one bee contributes. There are many different breeds of the honeybee. These are all breeds that people have developed over the years, just like we have with, say, our dogs, right? We have, I said we have livestock guardian dogs. There are several different breeds like that. People are really familiar with labs or all the doodle variations of dogs that we have and everything. So there are breeds of bees. Common ones are Italians, Russians, Carniolans, Saskatraz, and there are many more. There are also 3 different types of bees in the hive. There's the queen bee, which usually there's only one. Sometimes you can get a case where you have 2 queen bees in the hive. There are drones, which are the male bees. And these 2 don't have stingers, so they can't sting you. And then there are worker bees, and those can sting you. And the worker bees are all female. So the males are the drones, the worker bees are the females. In these pictures that I put here, the top left with the flowers that's a worker bee gathering nectar. I believe she doesn't have any pollen on her side, so she's gathering nectar out of the center of the flower. Down here, let's go over here. So there actually is a queen in this photo with lots of worker bees, and I don't think there are really any drones in this photo, but if you look here, there's a lot going on in this picture, or maybe not a lot, but there's things going on in this photo. But the queen is right here. So I don't know if folks can see that from there, but that is the queen there. So she's got a longer body. They can be different shades and colors. This queen is very light. The queen in the picture has a very dark body. It could be either way. It kind of just depends. It depends on the breed. It depends on just the genetic makeup of the bee or the hive. So these are very light bees. These are likely Italians. I tend to have a lot of Italian bees. I've had Russians, I've had Saskatraz, I've had several others as well. And when I do raise new bees or propagate colonies of bees, my bees are open air mated. So they're mating, the queens that are mating with drones that are in the area. So they might be from my other beehives, they might be from other beekeepers' hives. So once I buy a certain breed of bee and they reproduce a queen and or more hives, then they're no longer specifically Italians, for example. In this photo here, I put this up here because there are some drones in this photo. So there's a drone down here at the bottom with a very dark body. And there's also a drone, let's see, I think there was one. This one here looks like a drone. This is a drone. You can see his bigger eyes. His body's a little bit lighter. This is another, I believe that's another drone right there. And there's a nice big drone right here too, with a lighter body. So it does help to look at a lot of pictures, especially if you're interested, so that you can start to figure out which bees you're looking at in your hive. We can talk more about that, or you're certainly welcome to ask questions. Okay, going on. So like I said, we're gonna walk through a year. We're actually gonna start in April, because that's when, if people are getting bees and installing bees, generally your new packages or nucleus colonies arrive in April or May. So we'll start in April. You can get bees to install. You can get bees several different ways, but commonly you'll get a package of bees here. It's usually about 3 pounds of bees. It comes in this screened-in box. They can be plastic or wooden. The can there is actually a sugar syrup to feed the bees during transport. And there you can see the bees are all clustered up there in a ball. And then usually what they're actually clustered around is the queen cage. So their queen will be in there in her own separate little cage. And that's what you get if you order a package. You can also buy what's called a nucleus colony or a nuke, and that's basically a mini beehive. It'll be about 4 or 5 frames of bees with a queen, and that means that they might already have some brood and some honey or pollen supply in there, things like that. And then you can install it here. I can go through an installation if anybody wants. But you'll install your bees into your hive, and then the bees sort of take off and start doing their things. They'll do their orientation flights. They'll figure out that's where they live. They'll start going out and figuring out where there's nectar and pollen to gather. They'll come back and communicate that to the hive. So what's happening in April is they're moving in and they're doing the things to set up their home. The queen starts laying eggs, and so if you're not good at finding a queen, a good way to tell that you have a queen in a hive is to look for eggs. And this is what they look like. It looks like a little grain of rice down in the bottom of the cell. I also have a plastic model. These aren't great, but there is a plastic model here showing you what it would look like, which you guys can certainly take a look at. It's kind of cool. Very small, hard to see if you're over 50. You might have to put readers in your bee suit. I can attest to that. So they're going out and they're foraging. They're doing their other things. If you've got frames that don't have wax on them, so say you bought brand new equipment, this is not brand new. In fact, it's dirty and hasn't been cleaned up yet for this year. But if you start out with brand new equipment, you're going to start out with frames and comb that looks like this with nothing on it. And so they have to build all that out with wax. So they'll start making wax and building out the surface of the frames. In some cases, you can do things where they build the whole thing. They don't have a surface to build on. That takes a lot of energy from them. So it'll be a while if you're doing that before they can even start storing honey because they have to build up the wax. If you've had bees before, then you have some frames and stuff that are prepared, like I would say, where the bees, that's a super, I'm gonna make the library kind of dirty because it's probably, okay. So this is the frame that bees have already built out the wax on, which I'll pass around. This is great in the spring. You don't want to get frames like this from somebody you don't know, or you don't know what their beekeeping practices were like, because you don't know if there's potentially disease or pesticides and things in there. But if you know, then you can use something like this to get them started, and this actually gets them quite a ways. It's a lot of progress that they don't have to make up for. So you guys can certainly take a look at that and ask questions. Okay. So what do you need to be doing as a beekeeper? You want to make sure you want to install them in their hive, but if it's just a brand new package, you don't want to give them too much space to start with. You actually want to increase space in your beehive as they're increasing in population. So I use 8-frame Langstroth equipment. You can get 10-frame, and this is a deep brood box. But you would start with one deep brood box with your package of bees, and let them fill out all of the frames, start to lay eggs, start to put nectar in there and pollen and everything. And once you see them working about, like, you can take it over. Thanks. Yeah. You want them to be working about 70% of that box before you add another box on. So, maybe they haven't touched every frame, but if they're working on 6 out of 8 frames or 8 out of 10 frames, then you can put your next brood box on. There are different configurations. If you ask 3 beekeepers a question, you're going to get 4 different answers. So I'm just going to tell you what I do, but I can certainly answer questions about other styles. So in my case, then I would put on a second deep box, and they would overwinter with both deep boxes. So that's going to be their brood nest and all of their winter stores that they pack into these two. So I would put a second box on there, but I wouldn't do that until we've worked those frames, which we'll come to in probably the May or June slide. Okay, they need to have good sunlight. It's keeping a hive in too shady of a spot. Generally, they don't do well. You want to make sure that they have food, so they may be foraging. In April, there may not be a lot of forage. We tend to have pretty good forage here in this area because all the maples are blooming at that time, and that's a great source of forage for bees in the spring. You want to make sure that the queen, it's called queen rights, and you want to make sure that the queen has, after you've installed them and she's gotten out of her cage a few days later, you want to make sure she's alive, that there's evidence of her, at least eggs. And you want to be managing for pests. You always want to be managing for pests. So when I was a kid, there weren't that many pests to manage for. Certainly bears in the New England area. Skunks are a problem. There are a couple of types of moths and beetles that get into the hive and can cause problems. They've always been around. But now, in addition to those things, the traditional things that have been pests in hives, there are mites. And there's something called the varroa mite, which came into the U.S. from Asia in the late 80s and started to cause a lot of the colony collapse we were hearing about starting in the 90s and early 2000s. So you have to not only manage for like the external predators and pests, but also for very small things like varroa mites, which we will also talk about. All right, but there is forage available. So if you're interested in what bees need, both our honeybees and our native pollinators. In April, any kinds of maples. In fact, the red maples start to bloom in March. So any sugars that have both sugar maples and red maples will have to pull the red maple taps early because they tend to bud out and bloom earlier. So maples are great. willows, there's wild geranium, there's marshmallow marigolds, any of your violets, and a lot of your garden flowers. Some of them are not great, bees don't care about them, and some of them are. So, but those are the things for wild, that are in the wild for bees at that time of year. Okay. And then moving on to May, early May is okay to install packages. You know, if you get further down the month and you install a package into brand new equipment, those bees are going to have a hard time really building up for the year. But if you're installing them into, say, used equipment because your bees died during the winter, they're getting a head start, it's probably okay. You can certainly install nukes well into May, even in June, because if I do spring splits and I'm rearing queens for those, sometimes they're not ready until June 1st, and that's okay, because a nucleus colony, already has brood and a laying queen and some resources for food. The honey flow starts really well in May. So if your bees should have lots of forage. They should be getting out there and collecting nectar. So they go out and they collect they collect three things, but they collect nectar and pollen from the flowers. And then they collect like minerals and things from the soil, moist soil, from tree bark. They seem to love swimming pool water, probably because of the salts. And they use those things actually to make what's called propolis. And that is the glue that they use to kind of glue everything shut. So all the gunky stuff that looks a little like snot in this hive is propolis that the bees have put in there. Okay, so they're collecting all the things they need. They're building up their population. They're collecting nectar and making honey. They're collecting pollen. And they are not collecting the honey or the pollen for us. All right, we are robbing them of those resources when we take it out. They're collecting the honey and pollen because that's what they eat. So to feed their brood, they make what's called bee bread, which is honey and pollen together. You know, they mix it together, and that's what they feed. They feed their brood, and then they also, as adult bees, feed on the honey themselves, and especially all winter long. So they're collecting as much honey as possible, so they have food stores throughout the winter when there are no flowers, or through when we have a nectar dearth. When there's not enough nectar available. All right. So they'll probably need more space because there's honey flow on, lots of flowers blooming. So you have to give them, if you can give them their second box usually, and you can also start to put on honey supers. If they're working both boxes and you have a new queen that's really prolific and they're working all those frames, then you can put on a honey super. You may or may not, if you're just starting all brand new equipment, and a box of bees, a package of bees, generally you won't get honey the first year, or you shouldn't expect to get honey the first year, but you could. And if you're starting with equipment that you've used in previous years, they're going to build up more quickly. So you want to watch that, because in the olden days, before we had to manage for mites and pesticides and all the other things, what the instructors have told me who have been teaching beekeeping classes for decades is that they used to start out, and the number one thing that you had to avoid was swarming. Like that was how you managed your whole year, was to prevent your beehive from swarming, so that you didn't lose half of your bees. But now there's lots of things to manage besides just swarming. Okay, but you want to keep giving them enough space, or they will start to prepare to swarm. We'll talk about that in another slide. Okay, you want to start monitoring for mites, monitor for general health, so looking at the conditions in the colony. Just general observations for their behavior, their food stores, things like that. Is there evidence of external pests and whatnot? So doing hive inspections. May, June, and July, actually probably starting in April. April, May, June, and July, I do very regular hive checks. I don't get into every hive every week because I have too many hives to do that too. If you only have one or two hives, weekly hive checks during that time is a pretty good rule of thumb. You could definitely taper off then starting mid-July, kind of leave them alone. That's when they're not very happy anyway. And then you want to start up again in September for a little while to get back in there. So that's for hive checks. All right. In May, forage available in this area. The apple trees are blooming. Serviceberry, raspberry, clover, indigo. Lots of crop flowers. So if you've got farms planting various things that bees like, those are blooming, and your garden flowers. So here we have, I'm going to go across the bottom here for the pictures. The bottom left is showing you what a nucleus colony box looks like. If you buy a nuke, you're going to get it. It's going to be like a plastic corrugated box, so more of a temporary box. But then this is, it's this size, so it's a lot smaller than say this size. But that is the nucleus colony box there. This is a frame that's a brand new first year frame where they have built brand new wax, and then this queen has laid eggs here in this pattern. That's pretty normal. If you think about the old style, they call them skep beehives, like the ones that look like an arc, and you see them in old-fashioned pictures and baskets and stuff. That's actually the natural shape of a beehive if they're in the wild. So they'll build it in an arc where they have their brood nest, and then above that they have their honey stores and their pollen stores. Those two might be flipped around, but you'll see these arcs in there. So she's just laying here in this pattern because this is an upper frame, so it's sort of at the top of the brood nest where she's laying. It's a really nice brood pattern though. It's not spotty at all. There's just a few holes, which they leave those on purpose. So that's a very healthy colony right there. Really beautiful frame. These are bees here in a poppy flower. They love my poppies when they bloom. So if you have poppies, they love those. They're collecting pollen. I think there's nectar in there for them. Now, dandelions. We all do mow May, right? Or whatever, when we don't mow our lawns in May, or a lot of us do. And there are a lot of good flowers for bees. There's some great flowers for bees in May. Dandelions are not the greatest source. You will see them on dandelions. They will forage pollen, but they're not a high producer of nectar and pollens. Doesn't mean that they're totally invaluable, but everybody talks about how great dandelions are. They're okay. And we have lots of forage around here, but they're not the greatest. So there is a bee here on a dandelion. Do we have any questions in the chat or comments?
That's right.
Okay. All right. Moving on to probably the busiest month in the hive, I would say, throughout the year. The honey flow is continuing. We have lots of stuff blooming. Then because they've got lots of food coming in, they're building up their population of worker bees. They start to produce drones. So it's not random, like this back here where you saw this brood here. That's all worker bee brood. It's very flat. It's there's just worker bees. Yes.
But that's in May. That there.
Yeah.
That is in May. Okay.
Oh, that picture?
Yeah.
It could be May, that could be June or July, but it's showing you like what it would look like if you start on a fresh frame with no wax and stuff. That's what it would look like. So it could certainly look like that in May, could look like that in June or July as well.
Okay.
But that is all worker brood. Okay. But in June, because resources are great, they start to produce drones, the male bees. Drones are a little bit bigger. Their cells are bigger. And so you can see here, this is actually the bottom of a frame. So I'm looking up at the frame here. And these cells that are poking out that are bigger, that's drone brood. This is also drone brood. So around that is all honey. But you can see there in the center, those are sticking up a little higher than the flat surface of where they would normally cap things off. That's drone brood. And then this is a drone. No, wait, that's not a drone bee. That's a worker bee. Talk about that in a second. So anyway, that's what drone brood looks like. So you can tell they often build it in places on the bottoms of frames because they need more room and they need bigger cells than our normal cell size on a frame. So actually this is a good example for a couple of reasons. This is actually a honey super frame for comb honey. But because there was no foundation in here with sort of a set cell size, they built bigger cells. And you can see these cells are bigger. They're a little bit littler out here, but these bigger cells, those are drone-sized cells. So they would have hatched drones in there if they were hatching things in there. All right. The varroa mites that I talked about also start to build up in June. They're present year round. There are lots of different ways to control them. There are different approaches, different schools of thought. I'm happy to answer questions about that. They are quite large for when you think about a mite living on a bee. This is actually a worker bee with a varroa mite on her back, right there. So it's kind of like you or me wearing a dinner plate on the side of the body, walking around with a dinner plate attached to us. And if that's on her back, she probably has mites on her belly as well. So the mites tend to feed it. Until just a couple of years ago, it was thought that the mites, fed on the blood of the bee, but it turns out that they actually feed on the fat cells of the bee. So they're usually on the underside. If they're on the back, there's a lot of mites in that hive, is generally what that indicates. Okay, so you've got drone production increasing, you've got varroa mites building up, there's still lots of honey coming in. I'm usually putting on supers, lots of supers at this time of year. So they need more space. They need you to manage and monitor the mites and their general health observations, same things I talked about. And checking for swarm prevention. I'm going to talk about that in the July slide, but it's just as important in June. Sometimes in May if you've had if you overwintered a hive and they're building up a lot. Forage available. There's lots of wildflowers in June. Milkweed is a great one for them. More clover, your bee balm in your garden, coreopsis, and then of course there's still crops that are blooming, all of our farmed crops and garden flowers as well. Okay, so moving into July. We're going to talk about swarm prevention and what happens with swarming here, but like I said, that's also applicable in the earlier months. It can also happen it can happen later in the year too. It's less common. So let's start with these pictures and then we'll come down to my list here, which is a little bit out of order. But here you've got lots of bees, so lots of great, hive population. As they're building up, they start to think about swarming. And swarming is a natural process in a colony of bees to propagate their genetics, to decrease the population on the hive before they start to go into winter. So what they'll do is they decide, okay, we're going to swarm, and they have the queen lay eggs in what's called these little queen cups. So you've got brood there. All the covered cells there is just regular worker brood. And then you have this little cup that they build that sticks out the side, and they'll have her lay an egg in there. And then they will feed that larva, that egg, and once it hatches into larva, they'll feed that larva royal jelly and lots of extra nutrients to start to produce a queen. And as that larva then gets towards the pupating stage, they'll close that and cap that cell. So this is a capped queen cell, and that will become a queen. It looks like a peanut. So if you see something in your beehive that looks like a peanut, you have a capped queen cell. That might indicate that they swarmed. It might indicate that their queen was injured and they had to make an emergency queen, which they will do out of eggs or newly hatched larvae from eggs. So there's various reasons they can do that, but that is what a queen cell looks like. And then eventually she'll hatch, and this is a hatched, where a queen did hatch there. They will, if they're swarming, they'll produce lots of these. They'll be all over in the hive. They're generally hanging from the bottoms of the frames or anywhere where they can make these protruding cells. There will be lots of them. And if they're not capped yet, then they have not swarmed yet. But if they are capped, they've probably swarmed. You should just leave them alone, because that means the queen and, some percent, 40 to 50% of the hive population flew away, and they're looking for a new home. So then this new queen will hatch, she'll go out and mate, come back, and she'll be the new queen for the colony that was there. And the other ones will find a new home, hopefully. Okay, so also in July, towards late July, the honey flow stops. We don't have a lot of stuff blooming in late July. So it's really important, if you're interested in planting flowers for bees or helping bees, and any bees, though this is really true for our native pollinators too, is to plant things that pollinators like that bloom in late July through August. That's the most important time. So I plant Russian sage. There's a lot of panicle hydrangeas that they like. And they tend to bloom sort of at the very end of July, beginning of August, and they'll be covered in bees. There's fairy candle, or it's black cohosh is what that is. That also tends to bloom late, and bees love that. But there's some wildflowers, garden flowers, drought. But also, even if you have things blooming, if it's really dry, if we're in a drought, the flowers aren't going to produce a lot of nectar. They need rainfall to do that, or pollen, really. So the other thing they might need is water. You definitely want to remove your honey supers if you haven't already. They should come off because they're not going to be producing honey unless they need the food. So you don't want to leave them without any food either. You can take the honey supers off, and you can replace their food source with sugar syrup. If they've got a lot of food in their two lower boxes, they'll be okay. Generally, that's what I go for, or I'll leave a honey super on if they're super light and they need food. You want to continue all the monitoring that you're doing. If you see these kinds of cells, like with larvae in them, but not capped yet, you can do a split. And that way you can, and hopefully prevent them from swarming. You end up with 2 hives though. Yes.
Somebody want to know, what are you taking off? A super? What is that?
Honey super. Okay. Thank you for the question. Good. Please do ask questions and interrupt. All right. So this bottom box would be your is a deep box. This is one box of your brood chamber. I do 2 of these, so that's the double deeps for a brood chamber. They do store honey in here, and then if you as a beekeeper above that, you would probably, they don't need more brood room. They'll use it if you give it to them. But generally I put on medium boxes with honey frames. I only brought 1 box, I apologize. But these are medium frames, and they go in the 3rd box up here for them to fill with honey, because remember, they're building in that arc. So they've got their brood nest, they've got their pollen, and then they've got all their honey stores. And if you keep building up boxes with frames in it, they'll keep filling it with honey. And that's what the beekeepers can take from them if they have enough for winter. So I'll point that out in a picture in a second as well. Let's see. So you may need to supplement their food if you're in a dearth. And so dearth means no nectar available in the wild, no forage available. Or you can leave enough honey on for them. Yeah, okay, so we've talked about these pictures, and let's see. I don't think I wanted to point anything else out. So let me go to the next slide. So here, for the question about honey supers, you can see the 2 deeper boxes for their brood nests. Sorry about the photo bombs from the bees in front of my lens. But you can see that, and then above those boxes that are not as deep are honey supers. So in this case, there's 1 honey super on top of the orange hive, and there are 2 honey supers here, a blue one and a yellow one on this hive. And those are just purely for collecting honey. I don't use queen excluders. A lot of beekeepers do, particularly if they're really interested in collecting honey. So that means that in my case, I do end up with brood in those, and I have to wait for them to finish raising them, and then they'll backfill with honey as winter gets closer, and I can harvest it then. It works well. Okay, so let me go back to August here. All right, so August is our main month of dearth until the goldenrod starts to bloom, and there's a lot of different types of goldenrod, and not all of them are super valuable to the bees, but most of them are. So once the goldenrod starts blooming, you know you're coming out of dearth. So that's what you can plant goldenrod. Another thing you can plant if you're thinking about native or wild plants is Joe Pye weed. They love Joe Pye weed too, so that's another good one. All right, so they may not have a lot of food in the hive, and even if they have food in the hive, they're a strong colony and they're not able to forage, they will try to rob other weaker hives of their honey. So they will actually try to get past the guard bees and steal the honey and take it to their hive. So you have to monitor for that. You can do things like reducing the entrance on your smaller, weaker hives here. So there is an entrance reducer on this box that has various settings. In a strong colony, like in June, I would have it totally open. When I first installed this, like a package of bees, In April, you only have a few thousand bees, so I would probably have it on its smallest setting, so they just have one little opening to guard. In August, if you have a weaker colony, say you did a split, or maybe their queen wasn't very healthy or something, and they had to requeen themselves, so they just don't have a lot of bees, an entrance reducer is helpful because that reduces the amount of space that they have to guard. And if it's really bad, you can put on a robbing screen here. And what this does is bees that are going to rob the hive are trying to go straight for the entrance where they smell the honey, but the bees that live there will figure out how to go around and go in the top and then down into their own entrance because they figure out how to get into their own house. So it helps to prevent robbing because they will go in, they'll fight, they'll kill the queen. There's lots of plundering going on. That flower up there is fairy candle or black cohosh, and they love that. They're also beautiful in your flower gardens. Your mites reach their maximum population in August as well. So in July, the bees reach their maximum population for the summer. They start to decrease because the queen starts to lay less after the summer solstice. But the mites continue to reach their maximum population in August. And if the mites are out of control, that hive has very little chance of doing well. So we'll talk about that in a second. Because there's no food, because mite loads are high, bees are often angry this time of year. I've had some hives, especially if I'm doing a great job of controlling mites, and they've got plenty of food. Some of them are gentle, others are just testy year round, but most beehives are pretty defensive and pretty angry this time of year. So if you're doing everything right and you can get in there less. You don't have to do weekly hive inspections. Let's see, they do need you to manage their mites though. So like I said, the mites feed on the fat body of the bee, which weakens the bee, but they also vector viruses and diseases. So last winter was the largest loss in the United States since record keeping began of managed honeybee colonies across the entire country. So beekeepers lost entire yards, commercial beekeepers lost tons of bees, and it appears to have been from viruses that were vectored by mites. Probably other things too. They're still studying it, but those were the initial reports. In August, you do want to make sure they have access to water. That's true anytime there's not a lot of water. So July as well. Even on our property, we have like a lot of vernal pools and ponds and things, and they tend to get pretty dry in August. So this is just a little stone bird bath, and you can see all the bees here going to get water. There's leaves in the bottom of it, so they don't fall in. This is when they also try to get in people's swimming pools. If you have a swimming pool and you like bees, it's good to put something in there that they can float on, like a pool noodle or something, because otherwise they'll drown. So they can land on it, they can get their water, their chlorinated pool water that they love, and get a drink and go away. They won't bother you there. They're only aggressive at the hive. Their foraging bees are not going to chase you. They're not aggressive. If you happen to step on one, it'll sting you. But they're not going to come after you in your own pool. Honeybees won't. They're just there to get a drink of water. If your neighbor has a pool and they're complaining about your bees, it's good to put out some bird baths and maybe ask for a bucket of pool water that you can give them somewhere else, because they may not like it. So you have to figure out how to manage that. So like I said, there are not a lot of things that are flowering, but goldenrod, garden flowers. I talked about the ones that I plant. I think there's some others as well. The other thing I plant, which I'll talk about in a later slide, are fall asters. And some asters will start to bloom, I think, late August, September. But there are asters that will bloom all the way into November, and bees love the asters. So that's a great thing to plant, especially because it's that late fall forage for them. When, again, we don't have any crops, farm crops blooming or trees that are not blooming. So asters are really good. Okay, so the bottom right here shows some larvae that has been pulled out of a cell full of mites. You can see all these mites here on this larva. You can see here, I have these little plastic models of like a bee larva with its eyeballs in two different stages. Actually, this is the pupa stage, and this is the larva stage. So we'll let you guys take a look at those. Those are eyeballs. Those are not mites on the front there, because they do start to develop their eyeballs once their cells are capped. So what happens is the mites reproduce inside the cells. They prefer the drone cells for whatever reason, probably because drones take a little bit longer to develop and hatch, so they have more time to produce more mites, and there's more space in that cell.
Yeah.
So they'll go in and they'll mate, and then they'll mate with their siblings, and then the drone will hatch, and there's all kinds of mites coming out. So the mites can really explode in population. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. Okay. Questions online? Anything?
Right now.
Okay. All right.
You're too good.
All right, moving into September, if there's going to be a fall flow, which we've done pretty well the last several years, sometimes we don't get enough nectar production in the fall just because maybe there's not enough rain and water. But if there is a fall flow, then it happens in September, and that's when you can get a second honey harvest. It's also when, for the bees that are, maybe low on honey stores, can get a ton of honey brought into their hives. Go ahead.
So we have a question. How do you see the mites? They are so little.
So they're about the size of a pinhead, or a little smaller than a pinhead. So again, if you're in the over 50 club, they're hard to see. When you monitor for them, you don't want to just look at like a frame of bees like that and look for mites on the bees. There's a couple different ways to monitor. You have to collect some bees, and then the most effective way is to do what's called an alcohol wash. You use rubbing alcohol. So you want to make sure you don't have your queen in there, but the industry standard is to use rubbing alcohol and like in a glass jar, or they sell little sampling cups for this, with a half a cup of bees, rubbing alcohol, and you shake it, and it does kill the bees. You shake it, and then you can pour it out on like a white surface, or you can, the kits that they sell, it has a little strainer, so you can pull the bees out, and then you can look in the clear part, and you can see them because it looks like little specks of dirt, and those are the mites. You can also do it with powdered sugar, but it's not considered as accurate. It doesn't seem to get as many mites off, but it'll give you an indication for sure. So you can do the same thing where you shake them with powdered sugar. The bees don't die, so you can re-release them back into their hive. But it should, with the sugar on there, get the mites to detach from the bees, and then you can count those, pour it out onto like a paper plate, and count those. You can also you can use a like a sticky white bottom board surface in the bottom of your hive, and you can look at that to see if any mites are dying and falling off. Generally, that's more effective if you've done a treatment and you know that mites are dying, but it's another way to monitor. So there are different ways to do that, but you have to make them visible to yourself. You have to find a way to get them off of the bees and see them. Okay. The drones get kicked out in September too. The drones do not overwinter in the hive. So male bees are produced for one reason only. That is mating. So they otherwise, and they fly. They don't always go into the same hive like that they were born in. They might go into a neighbor's hive. They might go down the road to a different hive, and they come in. They eat the food. They say hi. They don't mate in the hive. They go to what's called a drone congregation area, which is where bees know this, but drones will gather, and a queen that needs to mate will go out to that drone congregation area when she's very early in her life. She only goes out a few times in a couple of days, very early in her life, for what are called her mating flights. And she'll mate with up to 20 drones. And when a drone does mate with her, after they consummate the marriage. I don't know if kids are watching. Close your kids' ears for a second. After they do that, his appendage falls off and he dies. But if he's not successful in mating and he's still in the hive and eating the food, all the worker bees, the girls, kick them out. And you can go out to your hive and you can see them on that landing board where they're shoving them off over the edge. It's quite funny. Yes, there's lots of interesting bee facts. Anyway, so the drones get kicked out in September. You're continuing to manage your mite population, your bee population, your health, all those things. you really want to start to pay attention to how much they have, how heavy the hive is for the winter, because they need to have honey stores to get by. So they can be collecting nectar. If they don't have a lot of honey stores in this box and the box above it, you don't want to put honey stores on. You want them to be filling these two boxes. And generally, you want these two boxes to weigh 80 to 100 pounds or even over 100 pounds going into winter, so that they have enough food in New England. I have in the past have weighed them and stuff with a scale and like kind of tipped them up and had my husband help me. But now what I do is I just sort of push on them on the back, and if I can push on them really easily, I know there's not much honey in there. They're hard to push on, but I know they're packed full, and it's probably 80 to 100 pounds. But you want them to have plenty of honey going into the winter. If they don't, and there's not a lot of nectar flow, then you need to feed them. And there's various ways to do that, but you want to feed them a sugar syrup, generally a 2-to-1 ratio of sugar to syrup, so it's very thick. It's actually kind of hard to mix, so that they can store that, and they'll store that as a honey substitute for them for the winter. You also want to put mouse guards on your hives. So, here we've got hives up here where the entrances are wide open, like I said, for healthy hives. This is a mouse guard, so mice will try to get in there and live with your bees in the winter. You don't want that. They make a mess of everything. They pee all over the frames and ruin your stuff, and the bees don't like it. So you want to start putting those in, because as soon as the nighttime temperatures drop, mice will try to start getting in there. They do have usually really good forage in September. Like I said, goldenrod, which starts in August. Japanese knotweed, which is an invasive species. It takes over. People hate it in their gardens and their yards and everything because it's a pain, but it's great forage for bees, honeybees, and native pollinators. And then, like I said, asters, those are another one. There are other flowers out there. I'm not listing all of them, but I'm giving you some examples of the ones that I tend to pay attention to. Also, it's you're collecting honey and stuff, so the fairs are usually in August, but some are in September. So there's an example of our honey there. Okay, October. This picture is not necessarily from October, but I'm using it to show you how we prepare our hives for winter. So the queen is not laying many eggs. They're not producing much brood. They're getting ready for winter. When the nighttime temperature is cold, all the bees will go into what's called a cluster. Basically, they make a big ball of bees, get really tight to keep the queen warm and to keep themselves warm. And they'll flap their wings on the outside and vibrate to create some heat. They're not heating the whole hive. They're not heating both boxes. They're just heating the cluster of bees. So we do, like I said, 2 of those deep boxes. And then on top of there, the box that you see, which maybe I can use the, yes, okay. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I'm pointing at the black wrappings, which is insulation around the hives. I have another picture where you see that I use like blue foam board to wrap them, but I do wrap the 2 brood boxes with some kind of insulation because the wood is pretty thin here. And if you think about feral colonies or wild colonies in other parts of the world, like a feral colony that lives in a tree, that cavity, the walls of the tree are a lot thicker than what this is usually. So this just doesn't give them a lot of insulation. So I give them a little bit of a boost. And then on top of that, so I do have a shim in there. You can see in these pictures with an upper entrance. And then I have what's called a quilt box. And so that box, like if you look at the pink box on the side here, you can see 2 holes on the side. So I use a shallow box. On the bottom of it is hardware cloth that the bees can't get through, so pretty small hole, hardware cloth. Also, those big holes that are drilled in the side have hardware cloth, so mice and stuff can't get into them. And then that's full of wood shavings. And what that does is allows the bees, as the bees are, they're producing moisture, right? As they're eating and breathing and everything in the hive. And moisture is what kills bees in the winter more than cold. So you want to really try and get that moisture out. So those wood shavings, the moisture goes up, it traps the moisture and it can kind of filter out. with airflow in there. So that's how I manage moisture. There's other ways to do it as well. You can use, there's moisture boards, there's other types of things you can do. But this is right. Yes, question.
Why does the moisture kill them? Or how?
It creates mold, and I think it just, if water gets on them, then they can't regulate their temperatures as much and stuff. So they like it to be really dry, but they do need water. Some of that moisture that they produce, they'll drink that because they need water. So they'll produce their own water sort of in the winter. But if it's just moist and damp, they can't regulate the temperature very well. So they like it to be nice and dry. How are we doing on time?
We're getting close to 7:30. It's about
Okay. All right. Well, we're getting close to the end of the year. Sounds good. So you want to manage moisture. Some people also, and I usually do this too, shim the back of the hive so it's just tipped forward a little bit, maybe a quarter inch, half an inch, so that any moisture that is coming in or rolling down the sides actually goes out the front. That's good for rain, during rain too. Yeah, some of the fall forage persists, particularly the asters, go into October and November. So you can see those there. I do have an owl decoy on my electric fence. You can see the electric fence in this picture all the way around the hives. And I have an owl decoy here because flycatchers love to eat bees that are loaded with pollen and honey and flying really slow back to their hives. So I put the owl up to scare the flycatchers away. They see it as, I guess, easy hunting, those flycatchers. All right, so moving into November, the bees are clustering in their hives. So this is showing you here from an infrared camera, one of my hives. You can see where the entrances are. There's one there, one there. It must be a little tiny gap there, but the cluster is nice and balled up right here in this lower chamber, which is great because they tend to work their way up through the food stores in the winter. So if they start out here, that means they've still got plenty of food above them. Bees don't cooperate all the time. So this is a really great example of what they should be doing in the winter, particularly in November, and they're down low, and hopefully they'll have plenty of food to work their way up through when they break cluster. So you want to make sure you're doing any final winterization. Sometimes I don't wrap my hives until early November if I haven't gotten to it, but you want to have everything ready. And then December, January, February, we're going to cover together because not much is happening except on really warm days. So they are clustering, and on really warm days, they go out for what are called cleansing flights. Bees don't poop in their own hive unless they're sick, except for the queen, because she never leaves the hive after she finishes her mating flight. She goes into the hive, or if she's swarming, but she doesn't leave regularly. But she has attendant bees that do all the things for her, like feed her and clean her. But anyway, but all the worker bees will go out and do toileting, cleansing flights on warm days. They also will remove dead bees. There are bees called undertaker bees. That's one of the duties. So they'll take out any dead bees and drop them away from the hive. They might try to forage on really warm days if there are really warm spells. Pussy willow will bloom. Some witch hazel I think will bloom in the winter if we have a couple of warm days. So they will look for that. Sometimes you might see some pollen or something coming into a hive if we have a warm spell. Otherwise they're clustering, and they do need to move that cluster as they go through the food stores. So this picture here on the top is showing you a cluster that's moved up close to so this is the upper entrance here. So it's up in the upper box and kind of underneath that upper shimmed area up here, which means they're running low on food. And I would have to make sure that I supplement their food. So beekeepers, what do beekeepers have to do? Make sure the entrances are clear, they can get in and out. Make sure that they have food or resupply their food if they don't. And you can't feed syrup in the winter, so you can feed sugar cakes. There's a lot of recipes online. I actually have settled the last couple of years on a product made by Hive Alive, and it's a fondant. It's patty that you put in there. It's got it's got the sugar that they need, but it's also got some other nutrients and things like natural compounds from seaweed that the bees like. So I put that in there. So you can see this is a warm day in the snow because there's lots of bee activity and they're doing all kinds of things there. You can also see the straps on the hives. We don't come from a really high wind area like Wyoming and stuff, but that's another bear. I have like triple bear protection here. So I have the two big dogs, which chase bears. I've seen them chase bears out of my aviary. We have the electric fence going all the way around. At this time of year, it's probably the not charged, it's not on because it's fed by solar and it's not getting much sunlight. And then we have them strapped down here as well. We have bears regularly on our property. And so we're just super careful. Because if you're not, bears will get into it. So this is a frame here that a bear, they knocked over the whole bench of hives. They broke into it, a bear. He or she broke into it, and you can see the claw marks, and here they went after things. And what they do in March, your hive is starting to build up. So if you've successfully gotten through the year, we're coming to the end of the year in March here, and your hive is still alive, then that queen is laying eggs and they're building, raising brood and building up their population again for the next year, right? And so a couple of things can happen here. They can run out of food stores really quickly because in March, not a lot of forage yet, so probably the red maples. And a few other things start to bloom, so early March for sure. So you do really want to check their food supplies in March. But also bears, if you don't have your fence charged yet, which is what happened to me this year, I was out there, the snow was gone, but it was still really wet on the ground, like it had just melted. And I thought I should probably get the fence going here in the next day or so. And that night a bear came, knocked it over, and they're not actually going after the honey. They're going after the brood for the protein. So Winnie the Pooh lied to us. Okay. Also, sorry, small children. But I have seen them eat honey because we've like when I pulled out old frames and stuff that we're going to get rid of, and we've caught bears sitting there, and my husband has yelled at them, and the bear's like licking it and covered in honey. He's like a young bear, and he's like, that looked like honey, like Winnie the Pooh, because he was just covered in honey. But anyway, they're actually for this. When they're getting into your hives and breaking into the hives, they're going after the brood because for the protein. So you've really got to watch that. Dewinterizing. So as soon as it's, kind of the same temperatures as it was in September and October, which could be March, April, you want to start to take off the insulation, start taking off the quilt box, opening up their entrances so they have more air, things like that. And that is the end of the year. So I think this is actually my last slide. I'm sure there are questions, which I'm happy to talk about, answer, have a discussion. Like I said, I think I'm going to be able to announce some beekeeping classes, which will probably run an hour and a half to 2 hours, and we can, they'll be in person. If people are interested in a Zoom option, write to me. We can figure that out. Maple Weekend is in March. I think it's the third weekend in March. You can certainly visit us. You can see our hives because you can walk down to our apiary when we're open for Maple Weekend. We're not normally open to the public. And then also some folks probably saw in the newspaper, I did not one, but 2 colony removals from structures this past summer. So one on the bottom here is the church in Orford. That was in the newspaper. We had lots of attention and public watching. Removed the bees from there. I did another one on this in a log cabin up in Post Mills this summer, and then actually the one on the top is from a few years ago, and that was a house in White River Junction where we were trying to get the bees out of the wall for the owners. Questions? Yes. Let's go back here.
Sure. This is just for me.
Okay.
How often do bee colonies fail over the winter?
Quite often.
And what makes them fail? I'm guessing. Weather,
Right.
but-
So it's hard to keep bees alive through the winter. This year, right now, this is before this upcoming weekend with the really cold stuff, but I have 9 out of 9 doing great. Last year, I lost all of them, probably because of whatever was going across the country, because that was the first year that I lost a significant amount of hives in a really long time. In quite a few years before that, I didn't have to buy bees. I would usually lose maybe 1 or 2 hives, and I'd get through the winter with 10 to 12. However, I go into winter with usually between 10 and 15 hives. This year, I went in with 9 because I had to rebuild up my whole apiary this past year. But right now, 9 are still alive. I think they were all dead by this time last year because of disease, presumably disease. So disease can kill them. Moisture can kill them. Lack of food. Those are the big things in winter. Managing mites so that they can't get diseases is probably your number one thing. Moisture is they're all high. You've got to manage a lot of different things. big swings in temperature, which we experience a lot now, in like the current decade and stuff, that also can really affect them, because if they break cluster on a warm day and then it gets cold and they haven't gotten back into cluster, they're probably not going to survive. Lots and lots of factors. It's pretty hard. So percentage-wise, though, I will say that I think the numbers across the country, survival rates are usually like 50 to 70% in general across the country. Last year was bad, like I said, but and my survival rates are usually up there more like 80, 90%. I have some with really small populations. They were doing great. I checked everybody during those warm couple of days, but I don't know if they'll make it. You know, there's one or two hives that I'm not sure if they have enough population to get through the cold spell. We'll see. So.
Someone online
Yes.
that they heard that some New England beekeepers winter their hives in warehouses. Is that recommended?
If you have a warehouse, you can do it. There are some beekeepers doing that in New England and other parts of the country as well. And my understanding is they're having really good success. I think that's probably because there's probably a lot of reasons, and they would be able to speak better to this than I can, but it provides more insulation and prevents those big ups and downs in temperature. You have to have proper ventilation. You have to have there's a lot of things to think about, lighting and stuff like that. And they're like you have to set it up so that it works. And I've seen talks about that, and I've seen people have great success. But again, you have to have a shed or warehouse, and you have to be able to outfit it so that the bees will survive. And there are specific things you have to do to set it up. So sure, if you could do that. I don't do that. I don't have the space to do that. And I do fine. They do okay. Out in the open. You had a question?
So if you do somehow find mites, is there a solution, or are you just trying
so there's lots of different ways to manage the population. Some people don't manage them at all, and maybe their bees will survive for a year or two, maybe they won't. So there's some people that think they're going to set it and forget it. There are people that are treatment-free beekeepers, but generally that is not recommended for small scale, because the way that's done is they have a lot of hives, and so they can produce enough bees to like replace any losses over the winter and keep their populations going. That's one way to do it. Then there are what are called cultural practices. So like they like to reproduce in the drone brood. So you can remove drone brood as you see it, and that'll help cut down the ability for the mites to reproduce. You can give them a brood break, and swarming actually naturally does that. So swarming causes challenges in like just the normal functioning of your hive, it can actually help to control your mite population. So some beekeepers will let bees just go ahead and swarm because it gives them a brood break. You can use natural chemicals. So we are actually certified naturally grown, which means we don't use any synthetic chemicals. Everything we do is approved for organic practices, but it's really hard to get your honey organic certified in the US because you can't control where your livestock forages, and it's based on where your livestock forages to get organic certification, or where you're growing it, right, where your crops are. So, but there is another certification, certified naturally grown, or CNG, which is what we have, which means we use practices that are organic practices, but obviously my bees are foraging wherever they're going to go. So that means that we do use some products that have natural chemicals. So there are ways to treat them with oxalic acid, which is found in rhubarb and other things. So it exists now, it's a natural compound. You can use you can use products that have formic acid in them. Formic acid is actually found in honey naturally. There are products that are derived from hops plants, like hops that are in beer. There's products that are derived from thyme, so there are different things like that you can do. And then the next step would be to use synthetic chemicals, which is what big commercial scale beekeepers use that transport their bees all over the country and stuff. And so those are lab derived insecticides that target the mites. There's different ways to do it, and it's kind of depends on what people want to do, how they want to manage their hives. But good question. Other questions?
One of the pictures of you removing hives.
Yeah.
Once you remove them, do you bring them back to your own and they become part of your apiary?
Yeah. So
How do you accommodate them, I guess? Yeah.
I would bring them back and put them in an empty box.
Yeah. Okay.
In a new home, but to get them out is really hard. So if you find a swarm of bees, a fresh swarm of bees, they're going to be hanging on a tree branch somewhere or a road sign or the side of somebody's car. That's really easy to get. Like I can come with a box and my bee suit and I can brush them all in the box. And as long as I get the queen in the box, they'll all go in there. I seal it up and I bring it home. But if they once they swarm, they're going to go try to find a new home. And sometimes they'll go to somebody's apiary and go into an empty box. But, they're going to pick a cavity somewhere. So it's going to be in a tree or the side of a house or a barn or the top of a church here. And they're going to start to set up their house. It's pretty hard to get them out. So in this case of this house, and it's always high up. I don't know why, but it's always high up. I guess that makes sense for them. In this case, we had to remove the clapboards, and we actually ended up later, the owner and I removed boards inside the wall too, because they had been, I don't know that colony had been there a long time, but bees had been living in that wall for a long, long time because there was like honeycomb and stuff up and down full stories. It was massive. So we were trying to get everything out, but you can take parts of it off if you can get in there, and then you start to take out any comb and you bring that, you have to protect it. You try to find the queen. It's usually impossible. But you can also, you can either make one, we made one, or you can buy what's called a bee vacuum. And it's basically a vacuum that doesn't kill them, but it's very gentle. And you start to vacuum them all up and hope that you get the queen. If you don't get the queen, you can give them a frame of brood and they'll make a queen. So you can try to get them out. It's pretty hard to force them out. Like if it's impossible, like if they're in brick, you can try to force them out, but chances are you may not get the queen, and all that stuff is going to be left in there that you can get in there. So it's challenging, but yep.
So I think we have probably our last two questions online.
Perfect.
What is your favorite bee behavior, and what do you love most about them as a creature?
Okay, cool. Bee behavior. Gosh. I really like what's called festooning, which I don't think I have a picture of, but do I have a picture of? I don't think I do. But it's kind of cool. It's like when there's two frames, I didn't put one in here. So let's say there are lots of bees in this hive right here, and this was full of bees, and you'll see if you pull one out, you'll see them like making a chain of bees all holding hands across the thing, and that's just really cool. It's called festooning, and I think it's really cute. It's really cool. There's also something called the waggle dance, which is how they communicate. One of the ways they communicate. Bees communicate with each other a lot of ways, but they will actually come into the hive and do this whole dance, which tells the other foraging bees where the nectar is, like where my poppies are, and that they're blooming. So they'll come in and they'll do like this whole directional thing to tell them to go out, and here's the sun, and go this way, and it's this far. And they do that through what's called the waggle dance because they're dancing, or it looks like they're dancing. It's pretty cool. And then what was the second part of the question?
What do you love most about them as a creature?
I mean, they're amazing. Like all the other bees don't overwinter in a colony. Like bumblebees, just the queen overwinters in the ground, and then she builds, or she lays more eggs and reproduces more bees in the spring. But they are like trying to keep everybody alive. They're very democratic. Like even their decision making, like they have a lot of communication and stuff. Like when they're going to find a new home in the side of a house, like they have different scout bees going out looking, and they come back and they negotiate until they finally pick one together. So they're just really neat in terms of like the way they live. I think it's pretty cool that it's like a matriarchal society. It's very cool. They're very clean. Honeybees are super clean. Like I said, they don't poop in their hive. They clean out the dead bees and stuff. And honey is really cool. Like it doesn't go bad. So I don't know. They're pretty cool.
How long do bees live? I'm sure it varies.
Depends on the bees. Drones, not very long, right?
Yeah.
Either they're gonna mate and die or they're gonna be kicked out. Queens can live for quite a long time. They can live for several years. I think that's less common these days, but before last year, I had a 3-year-old queen that I was going to mate this past spring. I wanted to reproduce her genetics, and then she died in that loss. So they can live for several years, queens can. Worker bees, it depends on the time of year. So normally in the summer, a worker bee lives about 40, 45 days, and they have different jobs throughout their life. But then the bees that they produce in the later part of the summer, going into the fall, those winter bees, they actually will live all winter. So they have a little bit different, like I don't know, just body makeup, so that they can last through the winter. So they live about 6 months, but they're going to die off during the winter and then pretty fast in the spring as they start to build up again. Worker bees, like I said, they go through jobs in those first 40, 45 days. Their very first job is to clean their own cell that they emerged from. So they have to clean it all out. And then they'll have other jobs in the hive for the first days. So cleaning other cells, drying honey, different things inside there. And then they will become a guard bee to guard the entrance. And then they'll become a forager. Foraging is the last job because it's most dangerous. So they'll forage until they get old and die. So yeah.
Awesome.
Any other
Thank you so
Okay.
much. This was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Thank you.